G'day folks, and welcome to this review of Tanto Monta, The Rise of Ferdinand and Isabella, 1470 to 1516. This is a design by Carlos Diaz Neves and was published by GMT Games in 2024. Now, this game covers a fascinating period in European, North African, Mediterranean, and indeed global history, covering conflict between Portugal and the kingdoms of Castile and Aragon, conflict between Muslim kingdoms and these European powers on the Iberian Peninsula, covering conflict between Spain and the Spanish kingdoms and France, covering piracy and the beginning of the age of exploration and great diplomacy between these powers and politics and war. Tanto Monta is a game for 4 players. One player plays as the Spanish kingdoms of Castile and Aragon. Another plays as the Portuguese, including their allies, the Beltrayanos, which effectively forces vying for the throne of Castile, rivaling Isabella's claim to the throne. Another player plays as the French, including their allies, the Catalans, who are vying for the Aragonian throne. And a fourth player plays as the Muslims, mainly North African kingdom and the Andalusian Nasrid kingdom of Granada, down the south of the Iberian Peninsula. This is a card-driven game. It is a successor to Here I Stand, Ed Beach's famous game Here I Stand, sequel of which was Virgin Queen, and I think you can consider this the third game in a clear chronology. So a card-driven game with highly variable hand sizes each turn. There are many effects and activities in this game which can increase or at times decrease your hand size. And so one turn you may find yourself with 11 or 12 cards in your hand. The next turn, you may be down to 6 or 7 cards. This is quite a change from Here I Stand, where there's a relative stability of much smaller hand sizes. Generally though, I think most players will be looking at an average of about 7, 8 or 9 cards per turn. And as in most card-driven games, you are using those cards either for the event or for operations and actions to do things on the map, on the board, and there are a vast range of actions. In terms of scope, this is a fascinating map. There is a lot going on, but attention is often focused on your turn. You're often focusing your attention on particular small focal areas. North Africa and the Iberian Peninsula are the most active, but all powers are active across the map. Spain, or what would be considered Spain, Portugal, the Iberian Peninsula, is probably the focal point for activities, and there's a lot going on. It takes sort of a central position in the map. The important thing is that there is scope for activity for all players pretty much everywhere across the game board. Every player can potentially be fighting wars on multiple fronts. They are wrestling with domestic and foreign politics. They are wrestling with multiple military campaigns. They are wrestling with leadership issues, and critically, they are wrestling principally with the struggle for victory points. Now, because of this, because across this vast map there is a lot going on, every time you as a player go to take an action, you have a really vast range of options available to you. And that breadth of choice, the breadth of strategic options, the breadth of tactical options, and the breadth of VPs available to pursue are, for me, some of the most valuable elements of game design in Tanto Monta. And it's also, in my view, a key reason why this is a far superior game compared to Here I Stand. But there are many other advantages, and In comparing this to Here I Stand, I'm also getting to the core of why I think Tanto Monta is an amazing gaming experience. Compared to Here I Stand, and it's an inevitable comparison because Here I Stand was the foundation upon which Tanto Monta was built. Tanto Monta is the successor. So compared to Here I Stand, each player has far more cards in their hand on a turn. And this addresses one of my main concerns with Here I Stand. You have more cards in hand, and this mitigates the risk of having a bad hand. It increases the likelihood that you'll get a balanced hand of good and bad cards. This gives you greater flexibility of strategy and tactics on a typical turn. It enhances, it empowers the choices that are available to you and that you can take on your turn. Added to that, so added to the larger hand size, the command points on these cards is on average far higher than Here I Stand. There are 3 home cards available to each player, and they may come in on various turns. You may not have all 3 available on any turn. But these are high and very valuable 5 CP cards, so you're guaranteed to take to have at least several high-powered cards each turn. There are a small number of 2 CP combat and response cards, but in general, the average value of these cards is far higher than compared to Here I Stand. In Here I Stand, the average value of cards is much lower. You only have 1 home card, which is valuable, but you have a large number of horrible 1 CP cards that you hate being dealt, and you have a smaller hand size. The net result of this is that on a typical turn of Tanto Monta, there is 2 to 3 times as much activity going on compared to a typical turn of Here I Stand. Despite the fact that there is a lower player count, we're going from 6 players in Here I Stand down to 4, there is more going on. Each player can do so much more on their turn. And that activity is more diverse and more interesting and, I'd argue, more enjoyable. And it's probably best illustrated by an example. So on turn 1, when you start the full campaign, as the Spanish player, Castile and Aragon, you have Isabella of Castile defending her claim to the throne against the Beltrianos Castilian forces who are allied with the Portuguese. So along the entire west side of the Kingdom of Castile, there are Portuguese and Beltrianos armies and leaders and keys and forts. And it's almost a front line against the forces of Castile. At the same time, the Spanish player controls Aragon, and Ferdinand is fighting off the French and their Catalan allies who hold Barcelona, and who also hold several keys and fortifications and have a superior navy off the east coast of the Iberian Peninsula. And then the Nasrid Kingdom of Granada is in the south, who they're technically at peace with. And they have a special rule, though, where they can attack and seize Gibraltar. So the Spanish, on turn 1, are literally surrounded by threats. All around the coast of the Iberian Peninsula, there are enemies. Add to this, they have forces in the Canary Islands working to seize those islands. They're also looking at the exploration map. Now, they can't be active there yet, but they want to jump on that exploration bandwagon as soon as they can. So there's a lot that they need to do. They need to secure their kingdoms against these enemies. Unfortunately for the Spanish, they typically have the highest hand draw each turn. So they're the most active throughout the turn. But of course, the situation changes each turn. The Reconquista will begin. The Canary Islands will hopefully be secured. Peace with Portugal will hopefully come. Christopher Columbus will sail, and this all changes the situation on the map and opens up more possibilities. It changes your focal points. And every other player in the game has a situation similar to this that changes every turn, that opens up new possibilities and strategies and choices. Leaders will rise and fall. Armies are built and quickly destroyed in battles. You'll explore and your settlements will rise and then be razed to the ground. There is so much going on. And to be clear, 90% of the actions in Tanto Monta are the same as in Here I Stand. The actions you perform are much the same as the actions you performed in Here I Stand, but you are performing those actions across a broader area. There is more going on, there is more tension, there is more interaction with all players, there are more opportunities available for you, more choices to make, or more choices available to you to make. As I said, you have more leaders, and there are many event cards that let you build up larger naval forces, certainly far more than Here I Stand. This facilitates more military activity and manoeuvring on the map. There is far more fighting, there are many more sieges and so forth. It is overall, I'd argue, a far more interesting, engaging and dynamic situation compared to Here I Stand. Another critical element is that the scope for victory points in Tanto Monta has vastly expanded, and the likelihood of random elements playing a critical role in gameplay has been minimised. In Here I Stand, a game will often end when a player reaches 25 victory points or more, or automatic victory. Now, VPs can be very tight. And I mean, I've had games where players have drawn Copernicus and Diplomatic Marriage to quickly race ahead several VPs to command the lead and inevitably win. In Tanto Monta, the VP track is about twice as big. A player can win if it's turn 4 or later and they have 48 VP, or if they're 7 points higher than anyone else. And there are some automatic victory point conditions again, but VPs are easy to grab, and victory is far less likely to be determined by a lucky card draw like Copernicus. There are far more event cards that give VPs for meeting certain conditions. There are VPs from resources that you can actively pursue. There are VPs available if certain players control certain locations. Some home cards all but guarantee VPs for controlling home keys. My point is, there is more of this sort of point salad approach to victory, which I'd argue contributes to greater game balance and stability and rewards the player that played best as opposed to the player who drew a lucky hand. This means that all players being of equal skill, you are more likely to be rewarded by good decision making and gameplay in Tanto Monta compared to Here I Stand. A bold statement, but one that I will vigorously defend. Tanto Monta is a fairer and more balanced game than Here I Stand. I have nowhere near played Tanto Monta enough to kind of ascertain win rates, but I would hazard a guess that all 4 players, if of the same skill level, would stand roughly even chances compared to win rates from Here I Stand. Now, we've got some good data from win rates in Here I Stand, and we know that it is very difficult for the papacy and the Protestants to win. We know that powers like the Habsburgs and England and France have a far higher win rate. Okay, so I feel there's that imbalance in Here I Stand. I feel that Tanto Monta is far more balanced. Now, of course, there's a downside to all this, and this is the degree of time and mental investment to play a game like Tanto Monta compared to Here I Stand. A typical game of Tanto Monta will be, I'd venture, at least twice as long, if not 3 times as long, as a typical game of Here I Stand. Not only because players have more cards and are performing more actions, but because those actions take more time to think about and implement. And there are a range of rules that only arise in specific circumstances, and you're often referring back to the rulebook to check details on what's going on. Now, Here I Stand is already a big game that takes a full day of gaming with 6 people. Tanto Monta at least doubles that with only 4 players. And I would argue that unless you have a table of very well-versed, experienced players, you're looking at a full 2 days of gaming, which is far more than the 3 to 7 hours as advertised on the box. There are also large sections of the rules dedicated to explaining specific card events. Indeed, a few event cards just say, go read section 20.6 in the rulebook and do what it says, because it can't all be covered on a card. So you're often going back to the rulebook to figure out what to do when certain events are played. Indeed, there is a lot of flicking through the rulebook, and that in itself is probably the biggest downside to the game. For example, in the spring phase, you'll rebuild the deck, you'll add new cards, you'll deal them out, but the Spanish and the French have variable hands, so you'll need to flick to sections 20.6 or 20.7 to figure out how many cards they draw and what dice you need to roll to determine how many cards they draw. Then you go back to section 10 to resolve the headline events, but an event may trigger new rules in section 20 point whatever, which means more flicking back and forth and so on. And this is quite frequent. So much so that my main recommendation is that every player have a print off of the PDF of the rules available. This will both make it easier for everyone to make their own checks, to focus on the sections relating to their player powers, and it also saves the quality of the rulebook that comes in the game from constant wear and tear. Having each player have a copy of this will make things a lot easier. Saves passing around, people will be constantly reading the rules, checking on things, the events in their hand. You get dealt a hand of cards, you know what event you've got, you can read up about that event. There are also some restrictions on actions. The crowns of Castile and Aragon were in a fierce war against the Portuguese and Belgianos in the 1470s. And to maintain gameplay balance, neither side can negotiate a peace until turn-specific events come out. And I've read many people say that they feel this places the game on rails. In a very broad sense, I agree with those criticisms. One of those rails is that the Portuguese and Spanish can't make peace in the 1470s. The rails really reflect a broader historical reality for the most part that helps ensure against wildly ahistorical outcomes. If the Spanish and Portuguese were allowed to and did ally on turn one, I fear it would just throw the balance of the game and give both powers too much free rein. Their historically assured war maintains the risk of that conflict. But as I said earlier, because of the breadth of options available, neither player is forced to actively prosecute the war. In the game I've just played, the Portuguese and the Spanish on turn one all but ignored each other. The Spanish focused on fighting the Catalans, the Portuguese focused on early exploration. I don't think there was any conflict between the Portuguese and the Spanish, but they were at war, and the risk of that conflict was always there, and they couldn't ally to move through each other's territories ahistorically. It wouldn't have happened. Well, look, it ensures balanced gameplay and ensure that all players have again that balanced footing. So personally, I don't have personal concerns with those rails, but they are there, and I'm aware that there has been criticism. I respect the desire for agency and control, but again, I think there is so much choice available that these slight restrictions in diplomacy are acceptable for me. Likewise, my personal view is that all those details on events and player-specific powers and rules adds to the flavour of the game. The piece of Alcachovas is huge in historical terms, and so it demands a page and a half of additional rules in the rulebook. And again, I've read that a lot of people don't like that about the game, that you play an event and there's another page and a half of rules. They feel it's too much chrome or it's too bloated, and I respect that people have different acceptable levels of chrome, our own sort of Goldilocks point where there is not too little, not too much in terms of rules. For me, the added rules in Tanto Monta, the restrictions, the chrome, the historical flavour, it all adds to that sense of history, the sense that you are experiencing the challenges that Isabella and Ferdinand faced, for example, in the 1470s, 1480s. I think they're acceptable barriers, and for me, it adds to the experience. And the history really is fascinating. Since I've started playing, I've been diving into the history, and I love that this game is encouraging me to learn more. Indeed, the deck is huge. It feels, it is so immersive. The flavour of the events that come out really encourages you to dive more, to learn into these various treaties and resolutions and individual characters who played a role in these events. Here I Stand is historically immersive. I'd argue that Tanto Monta, through the events, through the rules, takes it to another level of detail. Even the process of exploring. So in Here I Stand, you make an exploration roll, it's resolved. You might get lucky. You might circumnavigate the globe and get 2 victory points based on a single lucky die roll. In Tanto Monta, it breaks that process down. You must build your exploration ships, your nails. You must perform actions to sail out to, literally, you move your ships physically around a map of Africa. You must make navigation rolls when traversing difficult ocean passages. You must make terra incognita rolls to see if you gain those victory points. Now, again, these are victory points based on a random die roll, but you have shaped the factors that contribute to this. Your Nous have different crew abilities. They have strengths and weaknesses. You then establish settlements, and your settlements return resources to you as the home power. So it's a far more detailed, it's a process whereby you have greater control and agency and involvement and investment, rather than just making one die roll and that's it, and suddenly you're 2 VP towards your 25. I think it's a much more balanced, fairer way to resolve all this. As I said, conflict is far more frequent. Because you have more leaders, more armies, there is so much more going on. And as I said, and I just really want to reiterate this, on any given turn, despite the rails, despite the historical barriers in place, despite the limitations on alliances and so forth, despite the fact that there are fewer players, 4 players compared to 6, there is always a feeling that you have more options available. By virtue of more cards, more CPs available, but the onboard situation is broader. You have far more armies spread across a far greater area compared to Here I Stand. In summary, I highly recommend Tanto Monta. My personal view is that it is a superior game to Here I Stand. It is more complicated than Here I Stand. It is more complex. There is a lot of rules checking. It is slower than Here I Stand. It takes at least twice as long to play, despite the 4-player count. But I think it is far more rewarding, far more engaging, far more interesting, far more enjoyable. What else? Just a better game experience, with the caveat that be prepared to be regularly diving back into the rulebook. If you don't mind those rules checks, you play an event, Isabella dies, you go to page 47 or whatever, and resolve the events. Okay, so this is a core component of gameplay. And if everyone has a copy of this, there's only one rulebook in the game, but if everyone has a copy, they can be dealt their hand, they can read up on what's going to happen when they play their event, when it happens. Okay, so it does mean that a lot of people will be reading through the rulebook whilst it's not their turn, but that is a part of gameplay. All up, as I said, fascinating game design, fascinating gameplay experience. If you like Here I Stand, and you are prepared for that extra level of complexity and depth and time investment and learning experience, your first game or two may be really slow as you work through the nuances of gameplay and events and consequences, then I highly recommend Tanto Monta. This has very rapidly jumped to the top of my favourite multiplayer game experiences. Potential. I just think it's a wonderful game. Thank you everyone for watching, and take care. Bye for now.